When my wife of 50 years and our only son tricked me into signing away the one piece of land that held the story of our lives, I did not show them my rage. I showed them my gratitude. I thanked them for their foresight, for their supposed wisdom in protecting our legacy. And then I retreated to my study and began to unearth a much older, deeper truth. They thought they were selling a mountain. They had no idea that I was the only one who held the real map, a map that would lead them not to a fortune, but to a cliff of their own making. Before we survey this terrain, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what is the one place on earth you consider sacred? My name is Elijah Cole, and at 71 years old, my life is a study in patience. Here in the high, clear air of Denver, Colorado, my days are measured not by a clock, but by the slow, inexorable work of geology. For 40 years, I was a geologist, a man who learned to read the history of the world in the strata of a rock face, to understand time not in hours, but in epochs. My passion, however, has always been cartography, the art of mapping, of turning a wild, chaotic landscape into a thing of order, beauty, and truth. My greatest map, the one I have been working on for 50 years, is not of some distant, exotic place. It is of a 300-acre parcel of mountain land just west of the city, a wild, beautiful piece of the earth that my wife, Beatrice, and I bought when we were young and full of dreams. It is not a property to me. It is a sanctuary. It is where we picnicked on our anniversaries, where we taught our son, Caleb, to identify the constellations in the clear, dark sky. Every stream, every outcrop of granite, every ancient bristlecone pine on that land is a point on the map of my heart. Beatrice, my wife, seems to have misplaced her copy of that map. The 50 years we have shared have changed her, or perhaps they have simply revealed the woman who was there all along. The quiet, academic woman I married has been replaced by a woman with a restless, hungry spirit, a woman who finds the quiet beauty of our life together to be a form of confinement. She has grown tired of what she calls my dusty passions, and now speaks of a final, glamorous chapter, a life of European cruises and winters in Palm Beach. Our son, Caleb, is the architect of her discontent. He is a slick, ambitious real estate developer, a young man who sees the world not as a place of wonder, but as a portfolio of assets to be leveraged. He looks at our mountain sanctuary, the land where he learned to skip stones, and he sees only a prime location for a luxury resort. Their campaign began 6 months ago, a subtle two-front assault on my life's one great holding. Beatrice would speak of our future, her voice a soft melody of concern. Elijah, darling, we're not getting any younger. This land, it's a responsibility, the taxes, the upkeep. Perhaps it's time to let it go, to use that money to finally live a little. Caleb would follow her emotional appeal with the cold, hard logic of a developer. He would show me market analyses, zoning forecasts, architectural renderings of a magnificent soulless resort he called the Apex. He painted a picture of a legacy, not of nature, but of commerce, a monument to the Cole family vision. I resisted. I tried to explain that the land's value was not in its development potential, but in its wildness, in its untouched beauty. They looked at me with a kind of pitying affection, as if I were a sentimental old fool, a man clinging to a faded photograph in a digital world. Their final, brilliant move was to use my own values against me. They came to me last week, their faces a perfect picture of loving, collaborative concern. They presented me not with a sales agreement, but with a proposal for a conservation easement. "We've been thinking, Dad," Caleb began, his voice smooth and sincere. "And you're right. This land is too special to be developed, so we've found a better way. A way to protect it forever and get a significant tax benefit." The document they presented was thick with environmental jargon. It spoke of preserving wildlife corridors and protecting native plant species. It was a beautiful, noble lie. "All it does," Beatrice said, her hand gently resting on mine, her touch a memory of a trust that no longer existed, is put the land into a special trust managed by Caleb's company for tax purposes that legally forbids any future development. It's your dream, Elijah. A way to make sure our sanctuary stays a sanctuary forever. I was tired. I was worn down by the relentless campaign. And I admit, a fool. I saw the love in my wife's eyes, the earnest sincerity on my son's face, and I let myself believe. I signed the documents without reading the fine print, the dense, legalistic clauses that, I would later discover, were not a conservation easement at all, but a full and irrevocable transfer of the title to Caleb's Development Corporation. They had not just tricked me. They had used my own love for the land as the weapon to steal it from me. They left that day triumphant, leaving me with a folder full of lies and a heart full of a quiet, creeping unease. They thought their plan was perfect. They believed the old geologist had finally lost his ability to see what lay beneath the surface. They had no idea that I had spent a lifetime mapping that land, and that I knew of a few hidden features, a few geological secrets that were not on any of their corporate survey secrets that would turn their concrete dream into a pile of worthless dust. The game was not over. They had just made their opening move on a map that only I truly understood. The quiet unease that had settled in my heart after I signed the papers began to crystallize into a cold, hard suspicion. Beatrice's mood, which for months had been one of restless discontent, had transformed overnight. She was suddenly light, cheerful, and full of plans. She started buying travel magazines, leaving them open to glossy photos of Mediterranean beaches and Parisian cafes. She spoke of our new chapter with a giddy, triumphant excitement that felt entirely out of place for a woman who had just committed to the quiet, permanent preservation of a piece of land. She was not a woman settling into a peaceful future. She was a woman preparing for an escape. My son, Caleb, in a similar fashion, became professionally distant. His usual calls to discuss the market potential of my land ceased completely. When I would ask him about the next steps for the Conservation Trust, his answers were vague and evasive. "It's all in the hands of the lawyers now, Dad," he would say, his voice a little too quick. "It's a complex process. You know how it is." The man who had been obsessed with every detail of my property was now acting as if it were a tedious piece of paperwork he had already filed away. Their collective performance was a lie, and a poorly rehearsed one at that. The turning point, the moment my suspicion became a certainty, was a simple and accidental discovery. I was in my study one evening, archiving some of my old geological survey maps. I was looking for a specific quadrangle map of our mountain property from the 1970s. As I sorted through a box of Beatrice's old files from her time on the City Planning Commission, a file I had not opened in 30 years, a document slid out. It was not an old map. It was a recent, glossy geological report, commissioned and paid for by a name I did not recognize. But the subject of the report was unmistakable. It was our 300 acres. The report was not about conservation. It was a detailed, professional geotechnical survey, the kind a developer would need before breaking ground. It detailed soil composition, bedrock depth, and seismic stability. It was a blueprint for construction. But it was the addendum at the back of the report that made my blood run cold. It was a second report, this one a mineral rights survey. It spoke of a significant, previously unrecorded deposit of high-grade lithium-bearing pegmatite located in a series of deep quartz veins running directly through the center of the property. Lithium, the white gold of the modern age, the essential component in every battery, from a cell phone to an electric car. The report estimated the potential value of the deposit in the tens of millions of dollars. In that single, horrifying moment, the full, ugly truth of their conspiracy fell into place. This was never about a resort. The resort was a lie to cover up a bigger lie. Caleb had not just been planning to build a few luxury cabins. He had been planning to turn my beautiful, pristine mountain sanctuary into a massive, open-pit lithium mine. He was not just going to destroy the landscape. He was going to gut it, to rip its heart out for a quick, brutal, and astronomical profit. And my wife, Beatrice, the woman who had shared that land with me for 50 years, the woman who knew every flower and every stone, was his willing partner. They had not just stolen my land. They had stolen it with the intention of committing an act of profound, violent desecration. I looked at the survey map, at the cold, clinical lines indicating the location of the lithium deposit, and I felt a strange, cold smile spread across my face. Because I knew something that their expensive, high-tech geological survey had missed. I knew the land better than any machine. I knew its secret history. My own grandfather, a prospector in his youth, had been the first to survey that land 100 years ago. And I still had his original, hand-drawn maps, his private journals, tucked away in my safe. His journals spoke of the lithium. He called it the ghost rock. But they also spoke of something else, something he had discovered that had made him abandon any thought of mining there. He had discovered that the main lithium vein, the very heart of the deposit, ran directly through a massive, unstable, and deeply fractured fault line. A geological flaw so significant that any large-scale drilling or blasting would trigger a catastrophic landslide, taking half the mountain down with it. Their multi-million-dollar gold mine was sitting on a geological time bomb, and the only map that showed the location of that fault line was locked in my safe. My plan began to form, a strategy as patient and as layered as the geology of the mountain itself. I would not confront them. I would not show them my grandfather's maps. I would do what any good cartographer does. I would let them follow their own, flawed map, a map that showed them a treasure, but not the dragon that was sleeping beneath it. I would let them bring in their investors, their equipment, their grand and glorious plans. I would let them get to the very edge of their triumph. And then I would introduce them to a truth that was written not on a piece of paper, but in the very bones of the earth. What is more dangerous, a lie that is told or a truth that is withheld? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and hit the like button if you think my silence is the right strategy. The discovery of the lithium plot and the knowledge of the hidden fault line transformed me. My grief and sense of betrayal were still there, a cold, heavy weight in my chest, but they were now overlaid with the calm, focused precision of a scientist with a hypothesis to prove. The full, chilling scope of their deception was now clear. This was a betrayal of staggering proportions, a conspiracy between my wife and son that was not just about money, but about a fundamental and violent disrespect for the very earth I had taught them to love. Beatrice, my wife of 50 years, had looked at the mountain where we had built a lifetime of memories and had seen nothing but a mine. My son, Caleb, had looked at the land where he had learned to see the stars and had seen only a balance sheet. The betrayal was absolute, a rejection of every value I had ever held dear. The immediate consequence was that I had to become a master of a new kind of cartography, the mapping of their own greed. I needed to let them draw their own map to ruin, and my role was to subtly, quietly, remove any and all obstacles from their path. I began to play the part of the slightly befuddled, but ultimately relieved old man. I called Caleb and told him I was finally at peace with the decision. "You were right, son," I said, my voice a carefully crafted performance of weary acceptance. "It's a weight off my shoulders. I trust you and your mother to handle the details from here. I'm just going to focus on my old maps." I could hear the triumphant relief in his voice. He believed the final sentimental obstacle, his own father, had been removed. He was now free to pursue his destructive dream without any further emotional resistance. He and Beatrice became a whirlwind of activity. Their conversations, which I now monitored through a small, discreet recording device I had placed in the den, were no longer about conservation easements. They were about mining permits, mineral rights leases, and foreign investors. They spoke of my land not as a sanctuary, but as the asset. They were so blinded by their greed, so sure of their intellectual superiority over the old geologist, that they became careless. I listened as Caleb spoke on the phone to a group of Swiss investors, his voice a slick, confident purr as he described the geologically stable, high-yield lithium deposit. I heard Beatrice on a call with a lawyer, discussing the best way to structure the shell corporation to shield the profits from taxes. Each conversation was another piece of evidence, another entry in the logbook of their conspiracy. I was not just listening, I was building my case. The centerpiece of my plan, however, was not in my house, but in my safe deposit box at the bank. I retrieved my grandfather's old, leather-bound journals and his hand-drawn maps. The maps were beautiful, intricate things, drawn with a prospector's eye for detail, but a geologist's understanding of the deep earth. And there it was, a thick, angry red line snaking its way through the very heart of the property, labeled in my grandfather's spidery script, "The Widowmaker Fault, Unstable." His journals told the story. He described the small exploratory test blasts he had set off 100 years ago, and the terrifying, rumbling instability they had revealed. "To dig here," he had written, "is to invite the mountain to bury you." This was the truth. Not a legal truth, but a geological one, a truth far more powerful and unforgiving. I knew I could not simply present this map to the authorities. It would become a legal battle, a war of expert witnesses, and Caleb, with his team of expensive lawyers, might still find a way to win. No, the truth had to be revealed in a much more dramatic, undeniable, and public fashion. I needed a stage. And Caleb, in his arrogance, was building one for me. I learned through his recorded phone calls that he was planning a major event for his investors. He was going to fly them all to Denver, take them up to the property in helicopters, and give them a grand tour of their future gold mine. The tour would culminate in a celebratory groundbreaking ceremony, a symbolic first bite of the earth that would signal the beginning of their massively profitable enterprise. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the public stage where the laws of geology would deliver a verdict that no lawyer could appeal. My final preparation was an act of quiet academic sabotage. I took my grandfather's original hand-drawn map. With the steady hand of a master cartographer, I made one small, crucial alteration. I used a special, period-specific ink. I mixed myself to add a small, fictitious silver deposit on a far corner of the map, a place I knew to be solid, stable granite. I then contacted a specialist in historical document aging. I had him create a perfect, museum-quality replica of my altered map. The final product was a masterpiece, a beautiful, aged, and utterly convincing lie, containing one small, crucial, and entirely fabricated truth. The trap was now set. I had the real map, the one showing the catastrophic fault line, locked safely away. And I had a perfect, beautiful forgery. A forgery that I was about to accidentally let my son discover. A forgery that would lead him and his investors to the most spectacular and disastrous groundbreaking ceremony in the history of Colorado. What is the most powerful force in the world? A legal document, a scientific fact, or a well-told lie? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. With the beautiful forged map in my possession, and the date of Caleb's investor event drawing closer, my strategy entered its most delicate phase. I had to plant the seed of my own fabricated truth, to let Caleb discover the map in a way that would make him believe it was his own brilliant secret find. My decision was to use his own arrogance as the delivery mechanism. I knew he believed me to be a disorganized, sentimental old man. So I began the process of organizing my study, a chaotic performance of packing up a lifetime of research. I filled boxes with old books, survey charts, and geological samples. I made the room look like the aftermath of a small academic earthquake. One afternoon, When I knew Caleb and Beatrice were scheduled to come over for their weekly check-in, I staged the scene. I left the box containing my grandfather's journals and the forged map open on the floor, papers spilling out in a state of carefully curated disarray. The forged map itself was partially visible, its aged, hand-drawn elegance a stark and irresistible contrast to the modern, sterile documents around it. I then, accidentally, left the room to take a long and supposedly important phone call in the garden, leaving Caleb and his mother alone with my life's work. I watched them from the kitchen window. As I had predicted, Caleb's acquisitive curiosity got the better of him. He began to rummage through the open box. I saw the moment his eyes fell on the map. He picked it up, his movements suddenly sharp and focused. I saw him trace the lines with his finger, his expression shifting from curiosity to a dawning, predatory excitement. I saw him point out the small, fictitious silver deposit to Beatrice, a triumphant, conspiratorial whisper on his lips. He then did exactly what I had hoped he would do. He took out his phone and, believing he was unobserved, he took several high-resolution photographs of the map. He had not stolen the map itself. He had stolen a copy of my lie, an act that made the information feel even more like his own secret, his own discovery. He had his treasure map. He had no idea it was a map I had drawn specifically to lead him to his doom. My plan was now in motion, a quiet, inexorable geological process of its own. Caleb's excitement was palpable. The recordings I gathered over the next few days were a testament to his soaring arrogance. I listened as he spoke to his investors, his voice a low, excited hum, telling them of a new, secondary asset he had uncovered through his own deep-dive research. He spoke of a historic silver deposit, a charming, easily accessible bonus that would add even more value to their investment. He was not just selling them a mine. He was selling them a story of his own brilliance, with my fabricated map as his proof. The final piece of my preparation was to ensure that the truth, when it was revealed, would be undeniable. The day before the investor event, I took my grandfather's real, unaltered map, the one with the angry red line of the Widowmaker Fault, to a certified geologist at the Colorado School of Mines, a woman of unimpeachable reputation. I asked her for a formal, professional opinion on the feasibility of a large-scale mining operation on the site, as depicted on the map. She studied the map for an hour, her face growing more and more grave. Her final written report was a masterpiece of scientific understatement and absolute, terrifying certainty. Any significant percussive or explosive activity in the designated area, she wrote, would carry a catastrophic risk of sheer failure along the primary fault line, leading to a high-probability landslide of significant magnitude. To attempt to mine this location would be an act of gross, indefensible negligence. I now had my second weapon. The first was the lie that would lead them to the mountain. The second was the truth that would bury them when they got there. The morning of the event, I received a call from Beatrice. Her voice was full of a strange, proprietary excitement. "Elijah, darling, Caleb and I are heading up to the land with the investors. It's a huge day for the family. We were thinking it would be a lovely gesture if you would come and say a few words at the groundbreaking, a sort of symbolic passing of the torch." It was the perfect final piece of their performance, the sentimental old geologist giving his blessing to the desecration of his own sanctuary. "I would be honored," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "I have a few words I would very much like to share." I hung up the phone. I put on a warm, field-worthy jacket. I took the geologist's damning report and placed it in my inside pocket. And I drove toward the mountains, toward the grand and glorious stage my son had so foolishly built for me. I was not going there to pass a torch. I was going there to light a fire of truth that would consume their entire, glittering edifice of lies. Before the final act, a question for you. Please hit the like button if you believe that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to let your opponent think they have already won. In the comments below, tell me, what is the most powerful force? A legal contract, a scientific truth, or a person's own arrogance? I drove my old, reliable truck up the winding mountain road, the engine groaning in the thin, high air. The land, my land, was beautiful, bathed in the crisp, golden light of a Colorado autumn. The aspen trees were a riot of color, their leaves trembling in the breeze like a million tiny coins. A fortune of a different, more profound kind than the one my son was chasing. As I reached the summit, the scene that greeted me was a jarring, alien intrusion on the landscape's natural peace. A large, white tent had been erected on a flat meadow, the very meadow where Mary and I used to watch the meteor showers. A row of sleek, black helicopters sat silently on a makeshift landing pad, having ferried the wealthy investors up from the city. A small, temporary stage had been built, adorned with a banner that read, "The Apex at Coal Mountain. The future begins today." It was a monument to their arrogance, a corporate flag planted in the heart of my sanctuary. I parked my truck a discreet distance away and walked toward the gathering. Caleb saw me arrive and hurried over, his face flushed with a triumphant proprietary excitement. He wore an expensive suit and a hard hat, a ridiculous theatrical costume for a man who had never done a day of honest labor in his life. "Dad, you made it," he exclaimed, his voice a little too loud. "Isn't it incredible? Can you feel the energy?" I looked at him, at his shining, hungry eyes, and I felt a profound, aching pity. He was standing on the edge of a cliff and believed he was on the verge of learning to fly. Beatrice glided over, a vision in a stylish cashmere coat, a glass of champagne in her hand. She kissed my cheek, her lips cool. "Elijah, darling, I'm so glad you're here to see this," she said, her voice a low purr. "This is the beginning of our real life." I simply nodded, playing the part of the passenger on their runaway train. I mingled quietly, a ghost at their feast. I listened to Caleb as he gave a grand, sweeping tour to his investors, a group of stern-faced men from Switzerland and Japan. He used a pointer to indicate features on the landscape, his words a slick, confident stream of geological lies. "As you can see," he said, gesturing toward the very area where the Widowmaker fault lay hidden, "the bedrock here is a solid stable, granite shield perfect for the foundation of the main lodge and for the extraction of the secondary mineral assets we've identified." He was using my language, the language of geology, but he was using it to build a fiction. He was a bad cartographer, drawing a map not of the world as it was, but as he wished it to be. The plan was in full motion. The investors were clearly impressed, nodding along to his confident presentation. The reporters, whom Caleb had invited to document his triumph, were scribbling in their notepads and taking photos. The stage was perfectly set, the audience was captivated, and the star of the show, my own son, was about to deliver the performance of his life. After the tour, we all gathered in front of the small stage for the main event, the symbolic groundbreaking. Caleb and Beatrice took their places on the stage, along with the lead Swiss investor, a grim, hawk-faced man named Mr. Brandt. Caleb stepped to the podium, his face aglow with the light of his own perceived brilliance. He gave a speech, a soaring, self-congratulatory monument to his own vision. He spoke of progress, of innovation, of the synergy between luxury and nature. He thanked his visionary partners. And then he turned to me, his voice taking on a tone of deep filial reverence. "But most of all," he said, his eyes finding mine in the small crowd, "I want to thank my father, Elijah Cole, a man who taught me to love this mountain, a man whose legacy we are here to honor and to build upon. Dad, would you come up and say a few words and help us break the ground on our shared future?" It was a masterpiece of public manipulation, casting me as the willing, supportive patriarch of his destructive enterprise. I walked slowly to the stage, my face a mask of quiet, grandfatherly emotion, The crowd applauded. I stood at the podium, looking out at the investors, the reporters, and at my wife and son, who were beaming at me, their victory complete. I did not look at any of the notes I had prepared. I simply looked at the mountain, at the silent, patient, and powerful truth that surrounded us. The final, crucial pieces of my plan were now in position. The lie had been told. The audience was assembled. The stage was set. All that was left was for me to deliver the single quiet and devastatingly honest line that would bring the entire glittering charade to a crashing, grinding halt. Is there anything more satisfying than using a person's own words and actions to expose their true character? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like button if you're ready for the ground to break, one way or another. I stood at the podium, the crisp mountain air cool on my face. I looked out at the assembled crowd, at the expectant faces of the investors, at the poised pens of the reporters, and finally at my wife and son, who were standing beside me, their smiles wide and triumphant. They believed this was their coronation, the final symbolic act of their victory. They had no idea it was their execution. "Thank you, Caleb," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the small sound system they had set up. "Thank you all for coming up to this beautiful place. My son is right. I do love this mountain. I have spent a lifetime studying it, mapping it, learning its secrets. And today, I feel it is my duty to share one of those secrets with you." A flicker of confusion crossed Caleb's face. This was not in the script. Beatrice's smile tightened just a fraction. I continued, my voice calm and professorial, the voice of a geologist delivering a lecture. "My son has shown you his maps, his surveys, his plans for a magnificent future on this very spot. And his data is, for the most part, correct. There is, indeed, a significant lithium deposit running through this property. But his map, your map, is incomplete." I reached into the inside pocket of my field jacket. I did not pull out my grandfather's old hand-drawn map. I pulled out the slim, folded report from the certified geologist at the Colorado School of Mines. "You see," I said, letting my eyes sweep across the faces of the stern-faced investors, "a map is only as good as the cartographer who draws it. And a good cartographer never ignores a feature just because it is inconvenient to his plans. This is a report from an independent third-party geological surveyor, an expert in seismic stability." The lead investor, Mr. Brandt, took a half step forward. His hawk-like eyes narrowed with a sudden, intense focus. Caleb's face had gone from confused to pale. "This report," I said, my voice now as hard and as cold as the granite beneath our feet, "confirms what my own family's historical surveys have shown for over 100 years. The main lithium deposit, the very heart of the asset you have all invested in, is situated directly on top of a massive, deeply fractured, and critically unstable fault line. A fault line known to my grandfather as the Widowmaker." A shocked, uneasy murmur went through the crowd. The reporters were scribbling furiously. I had their complete and undivided attention. I turned to Caleb, my voice dropping to a low, conversational, but utterly damning tone. "You see, son, to build your resort, to excavate your mine, you would have to blast. And according to this report, the first significant percussive event on this site would trigger a catastrophic landslide. It would not just destroy your project, it would send half of this mountain down into the valley below." I then unfolded the report and held it up. "To build here, to dig here, would be," and I quote, "an act of gross, indefensible negligence." The silence that followed was absolute. The investors were no longer looking at Caleb with admiration. They were staring at him with a cold, murderous fury. They were businessmen who had been lied to, who had been led to the edge of a financial and geological catastrophe by a smooth-talking amateur who had not done his due diligence. Mr. Brandt, the Swiss investor, was the first to speak. He did not shout. His voice was a low, deadly hiss of pure, cold rage. He spoke directly to Caleb. "You brought us up to this mountain to show us a gold mine," he snarled. "But you have shown us nothing but your own incompetence and your own fraud." Beatrice, my wife, finally seemed to grasp the enormity of what was happening. "Elijah, no," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "He didn't know. We didn't know." I turned to her, my voice devoid of any warmth, any of the love that had defined our 50 years together. "You knew," I said, the words a quiet, final judgment. "You grew up on this mountain. You knew the stories. You knew the risks. But you chose to ignore them. You chose to gamble with the lives in the valley below for a chance at a bigger house and a fancier cruise." I then looked back at Caleb, at the ruins of the man who was my son. He was stammering, trying to form a denial, but no words came out. He was a developer who had just been exposed as a fraud, a son who had just been revealed as a fool, live and in front of his entire world. I had not needed to raise my voice. I had not needed to show them my secret map. I had simply presented the truth, the cold, hard, unchangeable truth of the earth itself, and that truth had buried them. The groundbreaking ceremony was over. The only thing that had been broken was my son's future and my wife as character. Their beautiful, concrete dream had just collided with a mountain of geological fact, and the mountain had won. When you see a lie exposed, what is more satisfying? The moment of revelation or the silent, inevitable fallout that follows? Hit the subscribe button if you agree that the truth is the most powerful force on earth, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. The aftermath on the mountaintop was a swift and brutal corporate execution. Mr. Brandt, the lead investor, did not waste another moment. He turned his back on Caleb, a final, contemptuous dismissal, and began barking orders into his satellite phone in sharp, clipped German. The other investors followed his lead, a silent, grim-faced group of men making their way back to the helicopters. They were not just pulling their funding, they were extricating themselves from a toxic disaster. The dream of the apex at Coal Mountain died right there, in the cold, clear air, its only monument a ridiculous, half-hammered golden stake in the ground. The reporters, smelling blood, swarmed Caleb, peppering him with questions he could not answer. I watched for a moment as he stood there, stammering and sweating in his absurd hard hat, a captain going down with a ship of his own foolish design. Then I turned and walked back to my old truck, my work on the mountain now complete. I drove away, leaving them to the wreckage they had created. The legal and financial fallout was, I learned later, catastrophic for my son. Mr. Brandt and his consortium of investors sued Caleb and his company for fraud, breach of contract, and gross negligence. The lawsuit was a multi-million-dollar affair that utterly annihilated his development firm and left him personally bankrupt and professionally radioactive. No one in Denver would ever trust him with a construction project again. He had gambled everything on a single arrogant bet against the truth, and he had lost in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Beatrice's fate was quieter, but in many ways more profound. She came home with me that day, the long, silent drive down the mountain, a funeral procession for our 50-year marriage. She did not try to apologize. She did not try to make excuses. She had been exposed, her greed and disloyalty laid bare, and there was nothing left to say. A week later, she packed her bags and moved out, going to live with a sister in California. Our divorce was quiet, uncontested, and final. I was generous in the settlement, giving her the house in the city and a portion of my savings. I did not do it out of love, but out of a final, weary sense of duty. I had not set out to destroy her, only to stop her. Her own choices had done the rest. With the divorce finalized, I sold the city house and moved permanently to the one place on earth that had never lied to me, the small rustic cabin on the mountain property. I was no longer its legal owner. The land was still tied up in the fraudulent trust Caleb had created, but I was its true custodian. I spent my days walking the familiar trails, mapping the ancient rocks, and breathing the clean, honest air. The quiet I discovered was not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace. One morning, about a year later, a car I did not recognize made its way up my long gravel driveway. A young woman got out. She introduced herself as a lawyer from the state's Environmental Protection Agency. She told me that, based on the public record of Caleb's failed development and the subsequent geological reports, the state was formally designating the entire 300-acre parcel as a protected wilderness area, forever safe from any future development or mining. The fraudulent trust would be dissolved, and the land would be placed under the permanent stewardship of the state park system. She then handed me a document. In recognition of my family as long history with the land and my own actions in preventing an environmental disaster, the state was offering me a lifetime tenancy, a legal right to live in my cabin on this land for the rest of my days as its official honorary warden. I stood on my small porch, a legal document in my hand, and looked out at the vast, sun-drenched expanse of my mountain. I had lost a wife, I had lost a son, but I had saved the one thing that truly mattered. My revenge was not in their ruin, but in this. It was in the rustle of the aspen leaves, in the cry of a hawk overhead, in the silent, unchangeable, and everlasting truth of the land. My name was no longer on the deed, but my soul was once again and forever a part of the map. That is how I got my so sweet revenge, and I would do it all over again. Thank you for following my story. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me about a place in nature that you believe is worth protecting at any cost.